God to man and man to God. A close Western follower and disciple, Charles Purdom played a significant role in introducing Meher Baba to the Western world. Through articles published in Everyman, a magazine that Purdom himself edited, and especially through his early biography, The Perfect Master, first published in 1937. Purdom wanted to collect Meher Baba's discourses in a single volume and in a somewhat simplified prose style, better suited, he felt, for a Western audience. Baba gave him permission to proceed with this undertaking, and the result was God to man and man to God, an edition that presented 60 of the original discourses in a somewhat pared down form. God to man and man to God was originally released in 1955 in London by Victor Gollancz, a distinguished British publisher. The book was republished in 1975 by Shahryar Press in Myrtle Beach. This second edition incorporated a new introduction and a few editorial emendations by Margaret Kraske. It also deleted the final section in Purdom's original version, quote, the states of God, unquote, which contains material from Baba not found in any of the original discourses. The PDFs on this website reproduce the text of Purdom's original 1955 edition. Since the text has been scanned and reflowed, the font and lineation will often differ from that of the Gollancz original, but the pagination remains the same. A short history of God to man and man to God. The following account is reproduced from the essay entitled, quote, A History of the Discourses, unquote, published in the revised 6th edition of Meher Baba's Discourses, Myrtle Beach, Shahryar Foundation, 2007, Volume 4, pages 3 to 80. This extract is taken from pages 33 to 41, with the original footnotes eliminated. The first complete re-edit of the discourses as a collection, and indeed the most radical reworking of the original among all the principal editions until the present time, was accomplished by an early Western disciple named Charles Purdom. In her preface to the second edition of God to Man and Man to God, Margaret Kraske, another early Western disciple, describes this distinguished British writer and scholar thus. Charles Purdom was among the small group of close disciples, including this writer, that Meher Baba drew to him on his first visit to the West in 1931. He was an Englishman of wide interests, writer, editor, and one of the early planners of the innovative Welwyn Garden City. In the early 1930s, very little was known, even in intellectual circles, about perfect masters. Nevertheless, Purdom published articles in his newspaper, The Everyman, introducing this subject with special reference to Meher Baba, who at that time had not publicly proclaimed his avatarhood. In 1937, Purdom published The Perfect Master, the first book about Meher Baba and his work to appear in the West. Schooled and acculturated in Britain during the final decades of its colonial era, Purdom, like many other Englishmen of his time, disliked sentimental effusion. And no doubt he found the prose expression in Baba's original discourses to be overly flowery and ornate. He preferred a more restrained, laconic style that eschewed superfluity. And there is no doubt that, writing in this idiom, he himself often achieved a powerful resonance. With such a background, and having already introduced Meher Baba in a significant way to the British reading public from the early 1930s, it would have been natural for Purdom to take interest in Baba's discourses, and at the same time, to feel that these essays would need to be significantly revamped in their prose style and brought within the compass of a single volume before they could be found acceptable by a Western reading public. He conveyed this request to Baba in 1948, and Baba in turn referred the question to Deshmukh. Initially, Deshmukh was resistant, but after a few years he relented and Purdom was allowed to proceed. The result was God to Man and Man to God, published in 1955 by Victor Galance, a distinguished publisher in London. Purdom's work clearly represents an edition of the Discourses, yet the original essays have been considerably transformed and shortened. The book title, according to Margaret Kraske, was chosen by Baba himself. Most of the original article titles Purdom retained. The book includes 60 of the original 69 essays of the 5-volume set, most of them essentially complete, though a few were significantly trimmed and reduced. The primary thrust of Purdom's editing, however, lay in the arena of prose style, and here Purdom revised extensively, mostly in the interests of simplicity and economy of expression. In his introduction, which is itself a memorable and eloquent statement, Purdom characterizes his undertaking thus: the discourses contained in this volume were not, usually, dictated word by word. Baba's method was to state a theme and to indicate a general outline, which was completed by an Indian disciple, though sometimes he would go over every word. The language and methods of illustrating what was said were for Indian hearers and readers. In preparing the discourses for Western publication, they have not been rewritten, but what seemed to be redundant words and phrases have been eliminated to reduce their length, and to make them clear without, however, any other change. End quote. In actual practice, Purdom's editing went beyond what this description would seem to suggest. From time to time, he excised paragraphs or even extended passages, and other sections were greatly boiled down to a fraction of their original expanse. Occasionally, he pared away certain significant details. For example, his rendering of the discourse on quote, avatar, end quote, eliminates reference to the 56 God-realized souls on earth at all times. Nonetheless, Purdom did not, quote unquote, rewrite, in the sense that while he trimmed and cut, he did not introduce new content or verbiage of his own. God to man and man to God does not attempt to quote unquote recreate the discourses in any way, and it should not be regarded as an interpretation or a quote unquote version. It is indeed what Purdom intended it to be. Meher Baba's discourses, somewhat pared down, sometimes in content, and expressed in a more economical prose style. Rosalie Margaret, are you ready to read? Unmute yourself, Rosalie Margaret.
I wanted to say her last name is Krask.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I only say that because it won't be recognizable otherwise.
All right, thanks, Rosalie Margaret. Yeah, thank you.
When God to Man and Man to God was published, Meher Baba's disciples and close devotees around the world seemed to be cognizant of Baba's practices in the dictation of messages. And none of the published responses express alarm at the fact that they had been significantly edited. In a letter published in the Awakener magazine, a quarterly magazine, earlier that year, Mani Asarani, Meher Baba's sister, referred to the matter thus: did I tell you that Charles Purdom has been working on the discourses, and the revised version will be published soon? There are those who believe that literally every word in the original discourses is Baba's and are reluctant to accept any revised version. But actually, though Baba dictated for hours on the board, Professor Deshmukh embellished and worked up the points. Though Deshmukh has undoubtedly done brilliant work in many places, we feel that there are many places where simplification of sentence structure or correction of grammar would enhance the beauty and simplicity, which are the essence of Baba's teachings. Deshmukh preferred not to give his name at all, though he was urged by some of the Mandali to do so, as he felt it was all done by Baba. Now we find there are places in the original discourses where Deshmukh obviously misinterpreted the point, with the result that there are several important errors. Attention was drawn to them by Baba lovers in Andhra, who wrote to Erich asking confirmation on the points. Mani follows up this preface with a 2-page summary of some of the errors in the 5-volume edition of the Discourses, as well as in Irene Conybeare's recent book, Civilization or Chaos. Plainly, part of Mani's purpose in commenting on Deshmukh's contribution in the quoted passage above was to provide the wider family of Meher Baba's devotees around the world, including many new followers, with a way of understanding why a re-edit, such as Purdom's, might be called for, and how errors in the original text might have cropped up. As Meher Baba's sister and one of his closest resident disciples, Mani would never have written and published such a letter without Baba's direct oversight and approval. The subject of the re-editing of the original discourses came in for discussion again in the next issue of the Awakener magazine. This time in Phyllis Frederick's review of God to Man and Man to God, newly published. The contrast between the original discourses and Purdom's reworking of them, Phyllis characterized thus. Purdom's style of English is excellent, smooth flowing, clear and to the point. The long-winded and inverted phraseology of the old edition is gone. However, I don't doubt but that there will be inevitably partisans of the old discourses and of the new. I think this is as it should be. After all, this is a new Bible for mankind, destined for innumerable editions. To many, the literary form of the old discourses was a very real stumbling block to their appreciation. This new edition, a painstaking labor of love by Mr. Purdom, for which we all can be truly grateful, should remove this objection and win a wider readership in the West for these incomparable essays on the spiritual meaning of life. Phyllis's prediction that the different editions of the discourses would each win their adherents proved to be true. And it remains true down to the present day. Yet, while Purdom's rendering certainly garnered its measure of acclaim, the later editions returned to the 5-volume set as their base text, and subsequent editors were far more conservative in their treatment. Nonetheless, the fact that an edition as drastic as Purdom should in its own time, have gained such ready acceptance among at least certain significant figures in the Baba world, attests to a generally non-literalistic attitude that prevailed then among much of Meher Baba's following, where his published messages were concerned. God to man and man to God appeared in the same year, 1955, as God Speaks. Meher Baba's supreme statement in the domain of metaphysics. Also in 1955, the 5-volume set completed its final edition. The next few years witnessed the publication of several of Meher Baba's other principal books, Listen, Humanity, and Life at its Best in 1957, and Beams from Meher Baba on the Spiritual Panorama in 1958. And during this same stretch of years from the end of the new life in 1952 through his final visit to the West in 1958, Meher Baba was issuing some of his most important short messages, such as the Universal Prayer, Meher Baba's Call, the Highest of the High, the Final Declaration, and the Universal Message. This phase indeed represented the high watermark of this avataric advent in terms of literary output.
Thank you, Rosalie. Ernie.
It's good to hear from Phyllis. Her birthday is May 31st. I'll always remember because she was very dear.
So Ernie, go ahead and read this title page.
Yeah, can you enlarge that?
I can. Thank you for reminding me.
All right, that's good. God to Man and Man to God, the Discourses of Meher Baba, first edition, 1955, edited by C.B. Purdom, an Avatar Meher Baba Trust ebook, June 2011. Copyright 2011, Avatar Meher Baba Perpetual Public Charitable Trust, Ahmednagar, India. Short publication history. God to Man and Man to God. The Discourses of Meher Baba was originally published by Victor Galland's, London, in 1955. It was published in a slightly revised second edition with a new introduction by Margaret Krask in 1975. This ebook reproduces the original 1955 edition.
I think we can skip the ebooks part.
The Avatar Meher Baba.
I think we can skip this.
Okay.
Or yeah. That's it. It's
Eugene, did you
non-specific.
get it from the trust side? I don't seem to get it.
Yes.
It's called God to Man and Man to God.
Yes, it's not in alphabetical order. It's I think at the D's for discourses.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, here we go to the main text. A lot of title pages. Oh, here we have the table of contents, which we don't need to read because we'll get it within the. There we go. Go ahead, Ernie. Sorry.
Okay. Introduction. The spiritual discourses contained in the following pages are by one who has been completely silent for 30 years and has not written a word except his signature for more than 28 years. They were dictated to a disciple by means of a Roman alphabet board for the benefit of his close followers. At Meher Baba's request, I've edited them to be made available for a wider public. Mirwan Shirija Arani, known as Meher Baba, was born in Pune of poor parents on 25th of February 1894. He was educated at the Roman Catholic St. Vincent's High School at Pune. Afterwards, at Deccan College. A lively, genial, intelligent boy, he was active in sports and interested in poetry, but had no special spiritual interest. At the age of 19, when cycling one morning, he passed an old woman sitting under a tree who beckoned to him, and when he came to her, embraced him. From that moment, he partly lost consciousness and was unable to continue his studies. She was a Muslim holy woman called Babajan, who died 18 years later. In 1931, at a great age, who died 18 years later in 1931, at a great age. Her shrine is maintained in Pune. Meher visited her a number of times, and for more than a year was in a deepening state of abnormal consciousness. After 2 years, he was fit to lead an itinerant life and visited several sadgurus. He came to the well-known spiritual master, Sai Baba of Shirdi, who sent him to another master, Upasni Maharaj of Sakori, who, when he first saw Mirwan, threw a stone at him, which hitting him on the head brought him to a certain degree of normal consciousness. He stayed nearly 7 years with Upasni at Sakari, and in 1921, Upasni said to Mirwan, now restored to full normal consciousness, an avatar is born in your person, Mirwan. You are the ancient one. He told one of his leading disciples, Gustaji, to follow Mirwan, thereafter called Meher Baba, which Gustaji has done ever since. Other disciples of Upasni at his orders followed Baba, who in 1922 opened an ashram near Arangan, Ahmednagar, named Meherabad, where he also carried on for some years a free school for boys of all castes and creeds. Afterwards, a free dispensary and a must ashram for God-intoxicated men not conscious of their physical bodies. He ceased to speak from 10th of July, 1925, using an alphabet board for communication. And in another 18 months, on 1st of January, 1927, he ceased to write. Nevertheless, he was intensely active, physically and in other ways, and traveled all over India, gathering to him disciples without distinction of nationality, caste, religion, or sex. He alternated these activities with long periods of seclusion and fasting, and his work has had a number of distinct phases, an account of which cannot be given here. Meher Baba's silence does not mean that he does not speak, for he declares that he speaks to himself, but he speaks to no one else. His work is done in silence, inwardly, and is concerned with awakening people to the unity of spiritual knowledge and the love of God. Until the spring of 1931, he did not leave the East, but has since paid 7 visits to Europe, including 5 visits to England and 4 visits to the United States of America. He has been twice around the world. These journeys were made privately in the course of his spiritual work and for the sake of contacting individuals. He has given a number of public darshans, however, the last being at Pandipar in the Deccan on 6th to 7th November 1954. He has already discontinued the use of the alphabet board on the previous 7th of October, reducing all communication to the minimum of gestures without making signs or using his fingers. He is now retiring into complete privacy, giving up all external activities and communication with the outside world. The discourses contained in this volume were not usually dictated word by word. Baba's method was to state a theme and to indicate a general outline, which was completed by an Indian disciple, though sometimes he would go over every word. The language and methods of illustrating what was said were for Indian hearers and readers. In preparing the discourses for Western publication, they have not been rewritten, but what seemed to be redundant words or phrases have been eliminated to reduce their length and to make them clearer without, however, any other change. These facts should be borne in mind now that the discourses are made available to a wider public. A certain amount of repetition that may be found is due to the form of the teaching.
Thank you, Ernie. Marvin, please.
Although these discourses are in the nature of teaching, Baba declares that he has not come to teach, for mankind has plenty of teachers. He is not interested in leading any religious organization because the world has plenty of religious leaders. He does not provide a substitute for Christianity, Buddhism, Mohammedanism, Judaism, or any other faith. Indeed, his first word to Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, or Jew, and every other believer is to practice his own faith. As the Ancient One, or Avatar, Baba's work is to awaken men and women throughout the world to the love of God and to their true selves as one with God. He carries out that work by providing an example of the life of which he speaks, also in other ways that he does not explain. In particular, he has a circle, which is described in these pages, including a group of devoted men and women disciples who serve and obey him implicitly, live continuously under his active direction, and represent in his immediate presence the world at large. In the discourses, dealing with the most profound things in the simplest language, Baba intends to raise the reader to his own level. They are not to be understood as mere contributions to philosophy or religious knowledge or to literature, though they contain explanations intended to aid the seeker after spirituality. What Baba aims at is to bring the reader to a state of being in which there is no separation between knower and known, or between being and knowing. He no more aims at imparting theoretical knowledge than at satisfying people's curiosity about himself or themselves or the world. He is not against such curiosity, but its satisfaction is not his work. He invites people to look at themselves, to accept their egotistic selves, not as good or bad, clever or stupid, successful or unsuccessful, but as illusions of their true selves, and to cease to identify themselves with the illusion. We who read him are all pretenders, so let us give up our pretenses, is what he causes us to say to ourselves, if we read him aright. But Baba does not say what moralists and religious reformers say, which is that in giving up our pretenses, we should be ashamed of ourselves for what we are. We are, as it were, in prison, enchained by our past. But, he says, open the prison door and come out. Breathe the air of infinity. Enter into your inheritance. And he adds, I will help you. We all see different worlds, but all are illusions. Baba invites us to look inwards with humility at our true selves, to look outwards in love because we are interwoven with others, and to look upwards with rejoicing at the eternal being. He also invites us to look at him, to keep him in our mind's eye, so that the illusion which surrounds us may have no power. This may be a stumbling block to those who have not met him, but to those who have it easily understandable. But to those who have it, it is easily understandable. And many who have not met him have come to understand it equally well. Baba proclaims brotherhood, for we cannot exist without each other. Our interests are the interests of all, and our good and the good of all. Unless we love each other with self-sacrificing love, we shall not be able to enter into our inheritance. Baba points within each heart and says, there is the infinite loving God. And he points to himself as the example of love. He is thus primarily concerned with the inner life. No social problems, he says, are to be solved from a point of view that accepts duality as real. He does not say that social problems do not matter, but that they are the effect of men's ideas about themselves, and that the attitude of men in all these practical affairs would be transformed were they to understand what was real and what was illusion. Baba declares, for him no one governs but one world. To him no one serves but his own self. For him no one enjoys but nature's wealth. To him no one suffers but his own self. To him no one worships but one God. For him no one slanders but his own self. For him no one treads but one path. For him no one reaches but one goal. To him no one stores but his own wealth. For him no one begs but his own lost wealth. To him no one lives but one life. To him no one dies but one death. Baba proclaims that God is the absolute fullness through whom only is there meaning in anything. God is the inwardness to which the mind of man has to be directed to enable the illusion of the world to be known. People ask Baba strange questions. When Pilate asked Jesus, art thou a king? Jesus said, thou sayest it, to the discomfiture of Pilate. When Baba is asked, are you God? He makes a similar answer to the discomfiture of the questioner. No one can read these discourses without realizing that Baba's answer to that question, which he certainly provokes, is the self in me and the self in you are the one self. This is declared by St. Paul, quote, but we all, with unveiled face, reflecting as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are transformed into the same image from glory to glory, unquote. These discourses cover a wide field, but they begin and end with the reader himself. This is therefore a dangerous book. Baba is dangerous, as all who have been near him know. He will not leave alone anyone who listens to him. This, therefore, is not a book for those who do not want to be disturbed and who propose to go on living as they have always done. Such readers will not like it. This is not a book for idle reading, but for quiet hours, for solitude, and for those who crave for their lives to be changed. Baba invites those who listen to him to do the impossible, because only the impossible has divine meaning. All that is possible belongs to the world of illusion. The reality is the undreamed of, the hidden ideal, even what has not entered into the heart of man to conceive. He invites us to be different, looking at each other with different eyes, taking up our work each day with a different impetus and vision from what we have hitherto known, so that we can say, as once was said in the world, quote, the Father who dwelleth in me, he doeth the works, end quote. Baba's awakening power is to enable us to experience that our true human being is divine. C.B. Purdom.
Thank you, Marvin. Mahu.
Oh, sorry, I was trying to locate it on my copy. What a beautiful writing. Oh, you're recording, I'm sorry.
It's on the screen if you haven't found it.
Yeah, I have it. I'm looking at your screen. The new humanity. As in all critical periods of human history, humanity is now going through the travels of a spiritual rebirth. Great forces of destruction seem to be dominant, but constructive and creative forces which will redeem humanity are also being released. And though the working of the constructive forces is silent, they will bring about the transformation of man, for it is a part of the divine plan to give to the world a fresh dispensation of the eternal truth. The urgent problem with which mankind is faced is to devise ways and means of eliminating the subtle and physical forms of conflict and rivalry in the various spheres of life. Wars are the most obvious among the sources of chaos, but do not in themselves constitute the central problem. They are the external symptoms of inner disorder. Wars and the suffering they bring cannot be avoided by propaganda for peace. If they are to disappear, it will be necessary to remove the root cause. Even when military wars are not being waged, individuals or groups of individuals are constantly engaged in economic or some other form of warfare, and military wars with their cruelty arise when these other causes are active. The root cause of the chaos which precipitates itself in wars is that people are in the grip of egoism and selfishness, and that they express egoism and self-interest individually as well as collectively. This is the life of illusory values. To face the truth is to realize that life is one in and through its many manifestations, and to lose the limiting self in realization of unity. With the dawn of understanding, the problem of wars would disappear. Wars have to be clearly seen as both unnecessary and unreasonable, so that the immediate problem is recognized as not how to stop wars, but how to wage them spiritually against the attitude of mind responsible for so cruel and painful a state of things. In the light of the truth of the unity of all, cooperative and harmonious life is to be perceived, and the chief task before those who are concerned with the rebuilding of human society is to do their utmost to dispel the spiritual ignorance that envelopes the mind of humanity. No title: Self-interest eliminated from all spheres of life. Wars do not arise merely to secure material ends. They are the product of uncritical identification with the narrow interests which are included in that part of the world that is regarded as mine, quote unquote mine. Material adjustment is only part of the wide problem of establishing a spiritual adjustment. But a spiritual adjustment requires the elimination of self, not only from the material spheres of life, but from the intellectual, emotional, and cultural life of man. To understand the problem of humanity as merely the problem of greed is to reduce humanity to the level of animality. Even when man sets himself to the limited task of securing material satisfaction, he can succeed in that attempt only if he has a spiritual understanding. Economic adjustment is impossible unless people realize that there can be no effectively planned and cooperative action in economic matters until self-interest gives place to self-giving love. Otherwise, with the best of equipment and efficiency in material spheres, conflict and insufficiency cannot be avoided. New title: The Rightful Place of Science. The new humanity to emerge out of the travel of present struggle and suffering will not ignore science or its practical applications. It is a mistake to look upon science as anti-spiritual. Science is a help or hindrance to spirituality, according to the use to which it is put. Just as art, when rightly practiced, is the expression of a spirituality. So science is the expression and fulfillment of the spirit, Scientific truths concerning the physical body and its life in the physical world can become a medium for the soul to know itself. But to serve this purpose, scientific truths must be set in the larger spiritual understanding and perception of values. In the absence of such understanding, scientific truths and applications may lead to destruction and to a life that strengthens the chains that bind the spirit. The progress of humanity is assured only with science and religion hand in hand. New title, The Need for a Spiritual Experience. The coming civilization of the new humanity will be expressed not in intellectual doctrines, but in living spiritual experience. The spiritual experience belongs to truths inaccessible to mere intellect. The spiritual truths can be stated and expressed through the intellect, and the intellect is of help for the communication of a spiritual experience. By itself, the intellect is insufficient for a spiritual experience or for its communication to others. Spiritual experience or for its communication to others. I read that, sorry. No intellectual explanation can be a substitute for a spiritual experience. It can at best prepare the ground for that experience. A spiritual experience involves more than can be grasped by intellect. It is often described as mystical experience. Mysticism is regarded as anti-intellectual, obscure, and confused, or impractical and unconnected with experience. But mysticism is none of these. There is nothing irrational in mysticism. When it is a vision of nothing, when it is a vision of reality. I read this sentence again, I'm sorry. There is nothing irrational in mysticism when it is a vision of reality. It is unclouded perception and so practical that it can be lived every moment of life and expressed in everyday duties. Its connection with experience is so deep that it is the final understanding of all experience. When a spiritual experience is described as mystical, one should not assume something supernatural or beyond consciousness. What is meant is that it is not accessible to human intellect until transcended and illumined by the direct realization of the infinite. Christ pointed the way to this spiritual experience when he said, quote, "Leave all and follow me," end quote. This means that man has to leave his limitations, including his virtues and vices, and get established in the infinite life of God. The spiritual experience not only involves the realization of the soul on higher planes, but a right attitude to worldly duties and everyday life. If it loses its connection with experience or the different phases of life, there is a neurotic reaction, which is far from being a spiritual experience.
Thank you, Mahu. VJ, can you read for us?
Yeah, Jai Baba, very, very prominent page. Very nice. Thank you, Mohammed. Spiritual experience is not born of escape. The spiritual experience that is to enliven and energize the new humanity is not a reaction to the demands of the realities of life. Those who do not have the capacity to adjust themselves to life have a tendency to recoil from its realities and seek protection and a self-created fortress of illusions.
That M is probably means in a self-created fortress of
Seek protection and a self, yeah. Such reaction is a mechanical attempt to perpetuate one's separate existence by protecting it from the demands made by life. It can give only a false sense of safety and self-completeness. It is not even an advance towards the solution, but a side-tracking from the path. Man will again and again be dislodged from his illusory shelters by irresistible waves of life, and will invite upon himself fresh forms of suffering by seeking to protect his separate existence. Just as a person may seek to hold on to the illusion of his separate experience by attempting to escape from life, so he may seek to hold on to it by identification with forms, ceremonies, and rituals, or with traditions and conventions. Forms, ceremonies, and rituals, traditions, and conventions are fetters to the release of infinite life. They may be an asset for securing the fulfillment of the divine life on earth, but they have a tendency to gather prestige and make claims for themselves. And attachment to them eventually leads to a curtailment and restriction of life. The new humanity will be freed from the life of limitations and have unhampered scope for the creative life of the spirit. It will break attachment to external forms and subordinate them to the claims of the spirit. The life of illusions and false values will be replaced by life in the truth, and the limitations through which the separate self lives will wither away. Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Identification with a group, a form of the limited self. Just as a person may seek to hold on to his separate existence through identification with external forms, so he may seek to hold on to it through identification with a nation, class, creed, sect, or religion, or with the divisions based upon sex. Here, the individual may seem to have lost his separative existence through identification with the larger whole. But in fact, he is expressing his separative existence through such identification, which enables him to take delight in a feeling of being separate and different from others who belong to another class, nationality, creed, sect, religion, or sex. Separative existence derives its strength from identification with itself and from distinguishing itself from its opposite. A man may seek to protect his separate existence through identification with one ideology rather than another, or with his cherished conception of the good, which he contrasts with what he regards as evil. What is found in identification with a limited ideal is not merging of the separate self, only an appearance of it. A real merging of the limited self in universal life involves the surrender of separative existence in all forms. Wonderful. Hope for the future. The great majority of people are caught in separative and assertive tendencies and are thus bound to despair about the future. It is necessary to look deeper into realities to get a correct view of present distress. The possibilities of the new humanity are hidden from those who look only at the surface of the world situations. The one outstanding feature of human nature is that in the midst of the working of disruptive forces, there exists some form of love. Oh. Even wars require the exercise of cooperative functioning, but its scope is restricted by identification with a limited aim. Wars are carried on by a form of love, but a love that has not been understood. For love to come to its own, it must be unlimited. Love exists in all phases of human life, but latent or limited and poisoned by personal ambition, racial pride, narrow loyalties, and rivalries and attachments to sex, nationality, sect, caste, or religion. For the resurrection, and rivalries and attachment to sex, nationality, sect, caste, or religion. For the resurrection of humanity, the heart of man will have to be unlocked with a new love that knows no corruption and is free from greed. The new humanity will come into existence in the release of love through the spiritual awakening brought about by the masters. Love cannot be born of mere determination, for through the exercise of will one can at best be beautiful. One may thought struggle and effort succeed in bringing his external actions into conformity with his conception of what is right. But such action is spiritually barren without the inward beauty of love. Love springs from within, in no way amenable to force. Love is essentially self-communicative and its own evidence. Those who get love from others make a response which is of the nature of love, unconquerable and irresistible, gathering power and spreading until it transforms the whole. Humanity will attend to a new mode of being through the free interplay of love from heart to heart.
Thanks, VJ.
Yeah, wonderful.